Thank you to all three. I think we heard opinions from different angles, different generations, different countries. We don't have much time left, so we have about half an hour left, so I don't want to take too much time here. Just one question, and maybe really brief, because I want the students and others in the audience to ask questions as well. If you were to briefly characterize what in your mind is actually Peres' greatest achievement, what would you point to?
Well, there are two great achievements. One, I think one is the security infrastructure of Israel, the solid foundations that he was practically the architect of it. Israel's security, military industry, and military capabilities, etc. And the second is the shift to peacemaking for the also approach.
I couldn't agree more. I think clearly Peres in the 50s helped secure the friendship and gave it the wherewithal to defend itself for many years to come. And I agree fully on Oslo. The story that's yet to be told about Oslo, because we've heard it from a variety of participants and so forth, but the story that's yet to be told is the tension between Peres and Rabin as they brought that issue to fruition. Rabin was aware of Oslo as it was being negotiated. He wanted to see whether or not the Syria track would take precedence or the Palestinian track would take precedence. He probably, at the end of the day, was disappointed that Oslo beat out the Syria track for reasons that didn't have to do necessarily with Syria, perhaps with the United States. But as you saw, even in the handshake on the White House lawn on September 13th, 1993, was a very reluctant Rabin entering into Oslo. And so one of the greatest achievements of Peres being Oslo was also, in a sense, weighted down by this very severe, I think, constraint of Rabin's attitude towards it.
And I agree as well. It was his security-related activities in the 1950s, the arms, the conventional weapons, the nuclear weapons that turned Israel, that really transformed Israel into a powerful country in the region. But that's not sufficient, because for him, that's not the goal. It's the means to achieve something bigger for Israel. And that something bigger is to turn Israel into a state that would be accepted, fully accepted by its neighbors, be part of the neighborhood, as opposed to a siege mentality. And I saw the last couple of weeks, Prime Minister Netanyahu, announced that he was naming the nuclear reactor, the Dimona, after Shimon Peres. And I think were Peres to be alive today, he would say thank you, but remember, this was supposed to be part of something a lot bigger. And I'm hoping that you will take this concrete security achievement and give Israel the ultimate security it needs, which is a state that is at peace with its neighbors.
So I will give you a footnote for your second edition, because you're absolutely right. I was struck by this declaration that Shimon Peres made publicly during the negotiations with Assad. He said, "Let us settle on the Golan Heights, and you will have the atom." He said that publicly. Had Vanunu said it, he might have been in jail, but he really said it.
Vanunu being the Israeli spy.
The whistleblower. It's the Edward Snowden.
I think we'll open it up. I have a lot more questions, but I would rather hear them from you. So, do we have mics?
Yes, sir.
Great. So, okay. So the first question then.
Recently, I read a fascinating book called The Bomb in the Basement. Perhaps many of you have heard of it. And that details, in great detail, the story that you told about how Israel got the nuclear option. I gathered from the stories that there was enormous dissension in the military, in various Israeli institutions, fearing that, among other things, this would detract from the conventional military weaponry and capabilities, and ultimately having a nuclear option is more a sign of weakness than of strength. If you have to depend on it, it's a veritable disaster. So I'm just curious if you want to comment on that.
Well, it's 100% accurate. There was tremendous discussion and dissent during that period. Would you have expected less in Israel than tremendous discussion and dissent? But it does reflect, as I think you heard both Shlomo and Guy talk about, very different conceptions of security and what the essence of the nuclear program was designed to achieve. If it was designed to achieve the ultimate deterrence that would then prompt the Arab states to make peace, didn't do a very good job for a very long time. If, however, it was in a way, I think as Shlomo was suggesting, a recognition that, and as I suggested, by contrasting the Jabotinsky-Buber idea, if it was a way of understanding that at the end of the day, Israel needed to remain strong and powerful enough to defend itself against anything, but not with an expectation that something peaceful is going to emerge from it. It's a very different conception of the strategic interest of the program.
People like Rabin and Yigal Allon, all this left-wing socially but right-wing politically tendency in Zionist politics at the time, they opposed the nuclear option because they believe that this means spending too much on something that will not deter, as Dan said rightly, because it did not deter. The fact is that we had all the time wars with the Arab world, and the nuclear capacity did not serve as a deterrence. And we need this money for conventional purposes, because we need defensible borders, and the conventional wars will be the order of the day. So that these were the two.
Well, it'll be interesting to find out one day when if the records are ever released, would be those occasions in which there was actually a possibility of Israel's using its capability. I for one, I don't know secrets in this respect, but there were probably a couple of occasions, the kind of doomsday scenarios where this might have been discussed in the bunker.
Well, there were two moments, according that were published. I mean, there is no secret of things we'll say. One was 1973, when Dayan seemed to have lost, according to some, his nerves, his serenity, and he suggested that to Golda, and Golda turned him down. That was something that was published. And the one that I hinted to is in 1967, when Ben-Gurion sent Peres to speak to Dayan, that was then the defense minister, and told him, why don't we conduct sort of a primitive device what they meant is an underground sort of explosion, and this will deter the Arabs from war. Because they were keenly insistent on not having the war. They were very pessimistic. Not only what will you do after the war with the occupied territories, but with the results of the war. Ben-Gurion was haunted by the memory of the Holocaust, and that was also one of the reasons for the nuclear option. Yes. So these were two moments when.
I wonder also about 1991, when Saddam Hussein was launching Scuds, and it was unknown whether or not any of those Scuds were going to be carrying WMD warheads. We may never get anything published on it.
And then it turned out that the Patriots caused more damage than
The American role.
Laura?
We actually are monitoring your Twitter feed. We have two related questions. Professor Vanami said, Peres thought that Israel could be a beacon for a new Middle East. So one question is, do you see prospects for Israel still being a beacon for a new Middle East? And
again, thank you very much for participating. The other question, which is related, is to what extent do you believe the ideals and leadership of the late President Shimon Peres are now embodied by the current administration of President Reuven Rivlin?
Oh, you mean, well, he's the president, but it's really government of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, I think that what you see today is that the strategic sands in the Middle East are moving in a way that you can have and practically working relations on security matters with countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, because you have now common enemies in the form of Islamist terrorism and Iran. But that was not the idea of a new Middle East that Shimon had in mind. He thought of some kind of a European Union, of a common market. You see, the Arab world around us is not very much in the business of selling and buying within themselves, and let alone with Israel. And the Israeli economy is a digital economy. And I'm not sure that this is the natural market in the foreseeable future for Israel's economic expansion in the region. But there is something deeper. You see, we have very good working relations with the Egyptians on security matters, but hardly any trade. This is a cold peace. And therefore, I don't see that unless there is a solution to the Palestinian problem, and it will take years of reconciliation until we can see truly trade and something similar, or remotely resembling a common economic space. A common economic space is not only an economic thing. The common economic space is also a cultural thing. Europe doesn't need the European Union to be a united continent in music, in literature, in history, in tastes, in landscapes. The European Union is an administrative superstructure that was built on something which is existent. It is a Christian continent. Let us not forget that as well. This is one reason they won't have the Turks. They can give different pretexts, but the fundamental pretext is that Europe is a Christian continent. The prize that they give each year to the politician or statesman or public figure that has contributed to the idea of Europe is called the Charlemagne Prize. It's the Emperor of Christian Europe. Imagine giving to Erdogan the Charlemagne Prize. It won't work. It is a contradiction in terms. So we have in the Middle East, Israel is an alien element. It is an anomaly in the Middle East. That can explain a lot, and we need to face it. This is the reality. We are now in good relations with the Saudis, but these are the relations of concubines. These are not relations that you bring your couple to the international soiree. No? So I think that we need to bear this in mind. It will take years before, but as my friend Amos Oz likes to say, this is about making peace, not about making love. These are two different things. First, let us have peace, and we'll see down the road we might make love as well.
It's great stuff for Twitter.
Yes, please.
So my
Mike?
And for future questioners, if you could stand up and introduce yourself before you ask the question that you ask.
Thank you. I'm Helen Sonnenschein, and I'm very proud and pleased to have been invited to serve on the advisory council of the Center for Israel Studies. A couple comments on a specific question. First of all, the idea of Peres being a visionary, an optimist, and at the same time a doer. It's almost the perfect prescription for any society that has problems. And I'm thinking, of course, of our own. And so that's a beautiful thought to keep in mind. The other thing I wanted to comment is I'm hoping that the speech that Peres gave is being taped, that we could have a copy of it, and perhaps also a copy of what Dr. Wachtel said, because those of us on the advisory council want very much to be able to use words like that to help promote the center. And my question is, the concept of the great man concept of history, I believe it was Ben-Ami that said that. Did I get that right? Whichever one. In any case, do you see that there is a great man on the horizon in the Arab world, in the Palestinian world, that Israeli great men of the future could work with?
No. No, I think we're, first of all, the context in which a great leader could operate is more challenging in this region today than it has been maybe in all of our lifetimes. The regional context and the local domestic issues in almost every country are really forbidding for even a great leader to emerge. But at the same time, there isn't a great leader that appears to be there, that has in any way risen above these challenging circumstances to define a vision of a different, either Middle East or even a different state program. And there are even doers. So if this perfect combination of visionary and doer was embodied in Mr. Peres, we're missing, I think, we're on deficits on both aspects throughout this region. I can't think of anybody who qualifies in a top tier in that respect.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I would add that on the Palestinian side, you have a weak and fractured Palestinian Authority, which controls just the West Bank, not even Gaza Strip, because that's led by Hamas. You have fractures within the PA. Abbas has been weak for quite some time and is on his way out. We just don't know when, and we really don't know yet who's going to replace him. And whoever it is going to have to consolidate his leadership and authority rather than pursue peacemaking with Israel. And then on the Israeli side, you have Netanyahu, who is always under pressure, but the pressure he's getting is from the right, not from the left. There's a very weak opposition, and the last comment I'll make on that has to do with what I think is a very, very dangerous trend in Israel and around the world today, which is populism. And we saw what happened here last week. We've seen what's happened in the last year in the Philippines, in Rome, in Western governments and other governments, and the same thing's happening in Israel, and it's been happening there for a while, and that makes it very difficult for a new leader to emerge and take risks for peace, because that person, that figure, that leader would have to say some things that are very unpopular, and that would go counter to the narrative that Israelis and Palestinians have been listening to for years now. And I don't see anybody on the horizon, and it would be very tough for them to go against this populist way.
I think that I fully agree that you look around and neither in Israel nor in Palestine nor throughout the Arab world you can find today bigger than life leaders that can change the course of history. The last perhaps were Sadat in Egypt, and then in Israel Rabin, Peres, and in his own way in his own way. I know it is not very popular to say it in Israel. Arafat himself, it will take more than a generation for the Palestinians to have a leader of that caliber. So we are poor and lacking in leadership. Sharon was something that I would not reject. That model is a model I would not reject. Although I personally and people like me were never political friends of this man. But I think that to be a leader that makes a major difference in questions of war and peace, you need to be a traitor. You need to betray your electorate, particularly in these days of rising populism. You see, Peres and Rabin got the Nobel Peace Prize, but none of them removed not even one settlement. Sharon did it. Why? Because he was opportunistic and he was not an ideologue. Being an ideologue in many spheres of life may be very attractive, not necessarily in politics. In politics, it makes you immovable. And this is what happens with Netanyahu. So I think that he's also a politician and he has his political considerations, but he comes from where he comes. He has this legacy from home. He has a sort of solid view about the Jews and the Arab world and the international community, etc. So I think that maybe, and I excuse myself for getting into your own politics, I think what we need these days are populists with benign intentions. And well, in the 19th century, in the 18th century, they had enlightened despots, and somehow it worked. So I think that an Israeli leader of the characteristics of Peres today, that will come to the public and say we need to make peace and give back land and divide Jerusalem, will get more or less divorced in this hall. So I think that maybe we are for a new kind of leadership that will be able to, to manipulate the public. All the breakthroughs that were made by people that betrayed their electorate. I went with Rabin to the Golan Heights in 1993, to the very settlement where during the electoral campaign he had said that even in times of peace, the Israeli Prime Minister that would withdraw from the Golan Heights would be out of his mind. And then in 1993 I was with him in this very same settlement where he said that. And he said, "You are going to dismantle this settlement for peace with the Syrians." So I think that we need to look for.
I'll share, if I might. Interestingly, when I arrived in Israel, the reason I corrected I was in Egypt under Clinton and Israel under Bush. I served in Israel throughout Sharon's tenure, almost exactly coterminous with his prime ministry. And when I arrived, his foreign minister was Shimon Peres. And it seemed like the oddest couple, but in fact it was not, for reasons that Shlomo just indicated. Sharon was not the visionary of Shimon Peres. He would never have written a book or an essay called The New Middle East. But Sharon understood that to get to that new Middle East, he had to betray many of the constituencies that had brought him to power. He told me a story once. We used to meet late at night most of the time, and he liked to tell stories, and then on the way back to Tel Aviv, I had to figure out why he was telling me these stories. This was my job. This was an easy one, though, because he tells me that one day, in the middle of the preparation for disengagement from Gaza, he says, "Did I ever tell you the story of the decision-making surrounding the building of the settlements in Gaza?" So on cue, I said no, because I wanted to hear the story. And he said, well, back in, I think it was 1979 or 80, when he was the Minister of Agriculture, he went to the cabinet And he said, I have a strategic idea of what we need to do in Gaza. We have to have a block of settlements between Gaza and Egypt in order to prevent Egypt from playing any games. And then I want small blocks of settlements in 2 locations in Gaza in order to break up the contiguity of the Gaza population. Cabinet turned him down and said no. And so Sharon said to me, so I went out and I just did it. And he did. He built Gush Katif and he built the 2 major settlement blocks,
Netzarim.
and so forth. Why was he telling me the story? Because we were now in 2004, beginning of 2005, and he was going to take them all out. Even though he was in the process of losing his own party, he ended up forming a new party. Because his own party conducted a referendum, and he lost the referendum. But he believed in 1979-80 that what he was doing was important for Israel, and he believed in 2004, 2005. And in a sense, it was at that point that I not only understood this engagement better, but I understood the connection that he had with Shimon Peres. Because they were very, very close, even when Peres left the government. Different kind of vision, different kind of doing, but it all came down to the same thing, which was what's best for Israel, and I, as a leader, can not only determine that, but actually carry it out.
Well, thank you. I think that was a good conclusion to a future that is very insecure, and hearing about populists that might betray their electorate. Maybe there's some hope in other places as well.
You already started, I mean.
Peres actually did make some comments during the election campaign about the now president-elect, but I think that's for another round. I'd like to thank all the people who helped to make this possible. I'd like to thank Laura Cutler. I'd also like to thank the Kennedy Political Student Union who participated and was part also of the Twitter stream, and all of you, and especially, of course, our panelists. So thank you for coming. I know you've all very busy schedules, and I really appreciate it.